I still remember the smell of roasted coffee beans and the faint sound of rain tapping against the diner's window that morning. It was another ordinary shift at Harper's Diner, a small place on the corner of 7th Avenue where dreams went to die and bills went to pile up. I was 25, working double shifts just to pay off my late father's medical debt. Every coin, every tip, every tired smile meant survival. My co-workers used to joke that I had hope in my pocket, but the truth was, I was barely holding it together. That morning, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a man who didn't belong there. Tailored navy blue suit, polished shoes, a silver watch that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. His confidence filled the room like perfume. Everyone looked up. He took a seat near the window, flipping open a sleek tablet before glancing at the menu, as if it was written in a foreign language. I walked over, clutching my notepad. "Good morning, sir. What can I get you?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. He looked up at me, eyes sharp, calculating. "Coffee. Black. And maybe a reason why this place is still open," he muttered with a half smirk. I blinked, unsure if he was joking. "Well, sir, people like coffee," I said softly. He chuckled, amused by my innocence. "Fair enough, but tell me, waitress." He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "If you were running this place, how would you make it profitable? Enlighten me. Consider it a business exercise." My heart skipped. I thought he was just being arrogant, one of those rich men who enjoyed testing people below them. Still, I smiled politely. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a business expert, sir." "Oh, come on," he teased. "Surely a waitress must know a thing or two about money." Something in his tone stung. Maybe it was the way he said waitress, like it was an insult. I could have walked away, but something inside me refused to. I met his gaze, straightened my posture, and said, "If I were running this place, I'd start by treating the staff like humans, not machines. Happy people make good coffee. Good coffee brings customers back, and loyalty can't be bought. It's earned." He froze. The smirk faded. His pen hovered mid-air above the napkin he was doodling on. I didn't stop there. And I'd listen. To the people who sweep the floors and wipe the tables, because they see what managers don't. You'd be surprised what people notice when they're invisible. Silence. The rain outside grew louder. The man stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign truth. For a second, he wasn't a billionaire, just a man who didn't expect a waitress to speak with that kind of fire. Finally, he exhaled, leaned back, and said quietly, "That's not bad." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "Excuse me," he muttered, grabbing his coat and walking out, leaving his coffee untouched. I watched him go, wondering if I'd said too much. But as he left, I noticed something strange. He had written something on the napkin, a single word in bold, sharp handwriting, perspective. At that moment, I didn't know that word would change my life. The next morning began like every other, with the hiss of the espresso machine, the dull chatter of regulars, and the familiar ache in my legs from standing too long. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of the diner, something inside me felt unsettled. I couldn't have stopped thinking about the man from yesterday, the one who asked me for financial advice like it was a joke, and then left behind that one haunting word, perspective. Why had he written that? Why did his expression change after I spoke? And why did I care at all about someone who probably lived in a world far beyond mine? I shook my head and tried to focus. Bills don't pay themselves. "Emily, you okay?" Rita, our head waitress, called out from behind the counter. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." She smirked. "About the guy in the fancy suit yesterday? The one who looked like he'd walked off a magazine cover?" I rolled my eyes. "Please, he's probably forgotten this place exists." But the words barely left my mouth before the doorbell above the diner rang. I froze. Rita's grin widened. Well, speak of the devil. I turned, and there he was. Same man. Same sharp presence. Same confidence. But this time, there was something different about him. His eyes. They weren't mocking or cold. They looked tired, thoughtful. He walked straight toward the same booth by the window and sat down, slowly, deliberately. I felt my heartbeat quicken, but I forced myself to grab my notepad and walk over. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone polite. "Morning," he replied, voice calmer than yesterday. "Coffee, black, please." I nodded, poured his cup, and set it in front of him. He didn't open a tablet this time. He didn't scroll his phone. He just looked out the window for a while, watching the rain slide down the glass. After a minute, he said softly, "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday." I blinked. "About what?" He turned his gaze toward me. "Loyalty. People. Listening to the invisible ones." He gave a dry chuckle. "You're right, you know. I run an empire built on numbers, not people. And somewhere along the line, I forgot which one matters more." For a second, I didn't know what to say. It was strange hearing humility from someone like him. He extended his hand across the table. "Watson." I realized I never properly introduced myself. I shook his hand, feeling slightly nervous. "Emily. Emily." He repeated my name slowly, like he was trying to commit it to memory. "Do you always speak your mind like that?" I smiled faintly. "Only when people ask questions they don't expect real answers to." He laughed, a genuine warm sound that softened his entire face. "Touché." He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. "You said something else too, about treating staff like humans, not machines. That hit harder than you realize. I've been in boardrooms all my life, surrounded by people who'd sell their souls for a promotion. But I couldn't remember the last time someone looked me in the eye and spoke the truth, without wanting something in return." I shrugged. "Maybe that's because I didn't expect anything from you." He studied me for a moment. "And yet, you gave me something I didn't know I needed." The air between us grew heavy, not in a romantic way, but in the way two people suddenly realize they're standing at the edge of something unexpected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to a page filled with scribbles and numbers. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. "Last night's calculations," he said with a sigh. "My company lost nearly 50 million in one quarter. My advisors are panicking. My investors want blood. And all I could think about was a waitress telling me that loyalty can't be bought." His honesty stunned me. "You're losing money?" He smirked faintly. "You sound surprised." "I guess I thought billionaires didn't lose." "Oh, we lose plenty," he said quietly. "We just hide it better." He looked up at me again, eyes softer now. "That's why I came back. I wanted to understand how someone who probably earns in a month what I spend on a single dinner could still sound like she's got life figured out." His words caught me off guard. "I don't have life figured out," I said quickly. "I just learned to live it without expecting it to be fair." That made him smile. "That's wisdom money can't buy." I hesitated, then asked, "Why tell me all this? You don't even know me." He leaned back, thoughtful. "Maybe that's exactly why. Everyone I know tells me what I want to hear. You told me what I needed to hear." I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, feeling oddly seen. He reached for his wallet, but instead of cash, he pulled out a black card and slid it toward me. His name was embossed in silver letters, Watson & Co. Investments. "If you ever want to see how the other side of life works," he said, "come by my office. No promises, no pressure, just a conversation." I looked at the card, then at him. Why me? Because sometimes, he said softly, the best advice comes from the people who have nothing to prove. He stood up, placed $100 bill on the table and buttoned his coat. But before he left, he paused at the door and glanced back at me. For what it's worth, Emily, you changed my night. Maybe you'll change my life too. The door closed behind him, the sound of the rain filling the silence he left behind. I stood there for a long time, staring at the black card in my hand. It felt unreal, like the universe had played some kind of strange joke. A billionaire had come into my world, asked me for advice, and then returned seeking more. Rita came over, wiping her hands on her apron. So, she said, peering at the card, who was that handsome mystery man? I smiled faintly. Someone who doesn't think he knows everything anymore. She raised an eyebrow. And what are you gonna do? I looked down at the card again, tracing the silver letters with my thumb. I don't know, I whispered. But something tells me my life's about to change. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, soft, like it was washing away the old version of me, one drop at a time. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Sleep had been a stranger all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black business card shining like a small piece of fate. Watson & Co. Investments. It sounded like another world, one that didn't belong to a waitress with worn-out shoes and a second-hand coat. And yet, something inside me whispered that I had to go. When life knocks, you don't always know if it's an opportunity or a test. But either way, you answer the door. By 9 a.m., I was standing in front of a glass skyscraper that stretched into the clouds. Its mirrored walls reflected the morning sun, making it look untouchable, powerful, perfect. My reflection in those glass panels, though, small, uncertain, and ordinary, reminded me how far from perfect I was. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby alone could have fed my family for a month. Polished marble floors, golden elevators, a chandelier that looked like frozen rain. Everyone walking through wore suits, confidence, and expensive perfume. And there I was, a diner waitress in a plain blue dress and a thrifted handbag. The receptionist, a woman with sharp glasses and even sharper judgment, looked at me like I'd walked into the wrong universe. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cold. "Yes," I said, holding out the card like a shield. "I have an appointment with Mr. Watson." She glanced at it, then at me, then back at the card, like it was a joke she wasn't in on. "Mr. Watson doesn't usually meet walk-ins." "He asked me to come," I said quietly. Before she could respond, the elevator doors behind her opened, and he stepped out, tall, composed, and utterly in control. Watson, the man who'd turned my simple world upside down. His eyes found mine instantly, and his expression softened. "Emily, you came." The receptionist blinked, clearly stunned. "Mr. Watson, I didn't realize." "It's all right, Sarah," he said smoothly. "She's my guest." He gestured for me to follow, and just like that, the entire lobby's energy shifted. People watched as I walked beside him, the waitress and the billionaire. Two worlds colliding in one hallway. Inside the elevator, I could feel my heart pounding. "You really didn't have to do this," I said. He smiled faintly. "You're the only person I wanted to do this for." I didn't know what that meant, so I stayed quiet. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into his office, or rather, a kingdom disguised as one. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Every piece of furniture looked custom-made. The air itself seemed richer. He motioned for me to sit. "I know this is out of your comfort zone," he said gently, "but trust me, I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to listen." "Listen to what?" He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "To the truth. Yesterday, after you spoke to me, I realized something. I've built a company that runs on fear. My managers compete instead of cooperate. My workers survive instead of thrive. I used to be proud of that. Now, I see it's poison. He looked at me with quiet sincerity. You see people, Emily, not numbers. That's what I've lost. I swallowed, unsure how to react. You give me too much credit, Mr. Watson. I just make coffee and try to stay kind. He smiled. That's exactly why I need your kind of mind. I frowned. I don't understand. He stood, walked to the window, and stared at the skyline. I've been trying to save my company from collapsing. My team is brilliant, but they've forgotten what matters. Real connection, purpose, people who care. Then he turned to me. I want you to sit in on a meeting today. Just observe. Say nothing if you want. I just want you to see. I blinked. Corporate meeting? He nodded. Yes. And afterward, tell me what you saw. Every instinct in me screamed that this was a mistake. What could a waitress possibly say in a room full of executives? But something in his eyes, trust maybe, made me nod. All right, I whispered. An hour later, I sat at the far end of a massive mahogany table, surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of Forbes magazine. Charts flashed on a screen, voices overlapped, numbers flew across the room like bullets. I watched. I watched how no one listened. They just waited for their turn to speak. I watched how fear made them flatter him. I watched how no one looked at the janitor refilling their water glasses. And I saw Watson, silent, conflicted, watching me instead of them. When the meeting ended, the room cleared. Watson turned to me. Well, I hesitated. You want the truth? I always do, he said. I met his gaze. They're smart, but not connected. They talk about profit, but not people. They speak like they're building machines, not dreams. And no one, not a single person, looked at your janitor, the only man in this room who was actually working. He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, You noticed that? I nodded. People like us always notice what others ignore. It's how we survive. Something shifted in his expression. Not shock this time, but admiration. Deep, genuine admiration. He walked closer, his voice low. You have something I can't teach. Heart. I smiled awkwardly. Heart doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Watson. He smiled too. Maybe not, but it just might save a company. He walked to his desk, picked up a small folder and handed it to me. Inside was a document, an employment proposal. Consultant? I read aloud, confused. He nodded. Just a small project. Temporary. I want you to help me reconnect this company with the people who built it. Observe, talk, listen, and tell me what they need. You don't need an MBA for that. You just need honesty. And you have that in abundance. I stared at him, stunned. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, he said gently. You gave me perspective, Emily. Now I want to give you a platform. Tears stung my eyes. I'm just me. He smiled softly. That's exactly why you're perfect for it. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, tall, cold, full of ambition. But inside that office, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as a waitress, not as a nobody, but as someone who could matter. When I left that building, the air felt different, lighter, brighter. In my hand was the folder that might change my life. In my heart was a new kind of hope, one that whispered, maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something extraordinary. It felt surreal walking into Watson & Co. the next week, not as a guest this time, but as someone with a badge. Consultant, Emily Harper. The word looked strange beneath my name. Consultant, me, the girl who once counted pennies to refill the diner's sugar jars. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, every pair of eyes turned toward me. Some curious, some confused, a few even condescending. Their whispers followed me down the hallway like shadows. Is she from PR? No, Watson hired her himself. She was a waitress, I heard, at some cheap diner. I could feel their disbelief burning holes through me. I wanted to shrink, to disappear. But then I remembered Watson's words. You don't need power to make a difference, Emily. You just need courage. So I lifted my chin and smiled. When I reached Watson's office, he was already there, standing by the window. Morning, he said warmly. Ready for your first day among the wolves? I laughed nervously. You make it sound so comforting. He smiled. Don't worry. They'll growl, but they won't bite, not as long as I'm here. That should have comforted me, but part of me knew this was my fight to face. The first few days were brutal. Executives dismissed me like I was invisible. Some meetings would go silent the moment I walked in. Others would forget to include me in emails. And one senior manager, a man named Carter, made sure to remind me every chance he got that I didn't belong. So, he sneered one afternoon, Watson brought in a waitress to tell us how to run a billion-dollar company? I smiled politely. I'm not here to run anything, just to listen. He laughed. Listen, we have analysts for that. Maybe, I said calmly. But do your analysts listen to the janitors, the receptionists, the people who actually see how things work? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then he muttered something under his breath and walked off. That night, as I left the building, I saw Watson waiting by the lobby doors. Rough day? He asked gently. I sighed. Do you ever get used to people underestimating you? He chuckled. No, but you learn to let their doubts fuel your purpose. I looked at him curiously. Is that how you built this? He smiled faintly. That's how I survived it. There was a quiet pause, the kind that feels safe. Then he said, I meant what I said before, Emily. You see what others can't. Don't let them scare you out of that. His words gave me strength. Weeks passed. I started doing what I was hired to do. Listening. Not to executives, but to the invisible ones. I spent lunch breaks with the cafeteria staff, late nights with the janitors, early mornings with the security guards. I asked questions, not about profits, but about people. What makes your job hard? What would make it better? What would you change if you could? And they told me everything. How their ideas were ignored. How overtime went unpaid. How management never looked them in the eye. I wrote everything down, every small truth, every quiet injustice, and turned it into a report. When I handed it to Watson, he spent the entire evening reading it silently. When he looked up, his eyes glistened. How did we miss all this? Because you stopped listening, I said softly. He nodded slowly. Then let's fix it. The next month was a revolution in slow motion. Watson ordered new policies, fair pay adjustments, better working hours, recognition programs for lower staff. He began visiting every department personally, asking names, shaking hands, and people noticed. The air in the building changed. Smiles appeared where silence used to be. Departments began collaborating instead of competing. Even Carter, the man who mocked me, started coming to me for advice. One afternoon, he approached my desk hesitantly. Emily, he said, scratching the back of his neck. About what I said before. I was wrong. You've done more for morale in a month than our HR team did in a year. I smiled. It's not about morale, Carter. It's about meaning. He nodded quietly, humbled. But the biggest change wasn't in them. It was in Watson. He started spending more time out of his office, less time chasing profit margins. One day, he told me something that stayed with me. I built my empire to prove something, he said. To the world, to myself. But now, I just want to build something good. He looked at me, his voice soft. You reminded me that people matter more than numbers, Emily, and I don't know how to thank you for that. I smiled. Maybe just promise you'll never forget it again. He chuckled. Deal. But success brings storms. The investors weren't happy. You're spending money fixing janitors' problems, one of them sneered during a board meeting. You're supposed to lead, not babysit. Watson didn't flinch. If taking care of the people who keep this company alive is babysitting, then maybe you should sell your shares. The room went silent. I felt proud, but also scared. After the meeting, I found him in his office, staring out at the skyline again. You'll lose them, I said quietly. The investors. He turned to me, his expression firm. Maybe. But if I lose my humanity, what's left to save? Something about the way he said it, steady, unshaken, made my heart ache in a way I didn't expect. For the first time, I saw not a billionaire, not a boss, but a man trying to heal from the same emptiness I'd once lived with. And maybe, just maybe, we were healing each other. When I got home that night, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked stronger, more certain. A waitress had walked into a billionaire's world and somehow taught it to feel again. But deep inside, I had no idea that the biggest test, the one that would either break me or define me, was still waiting just around the corner. The conference room was alive with tension the next morning. Rows of executives in dark suits murmured quietly as Watson stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the glass wall that overlooked the city. The skyline glimmered like shards of promise, but his eyes looked tired. I stood near the door, unnoticed, holding a small notepad, pretending I belonged there. He turned to me briefly, gave a small nod and whispered, "Stay. I want you to hear this." Then he walked toward the center, pressed the mic, and began. "Good morning. I know many of you have questions about the future of this company," he said, voice steady but softer than usual. "You've seen the headlines. You've heard the rumors. Some of you might even be preparing your exit plans." A nervous ripple went through the room. He continued, "For years, I built this empire thinking that strategy and money were all that mattered. But yesterday, I met someone, a waitress, who told me something I'd forgotten." A few executives exchanged skeptical looks, but Watson didn't waver. She said, "Money can buy loyalty for a moment, but only respect makes people stay." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. He smiled faintly. That one line hit harder than any market report. "So today we were going to do something I've never done before. We were going to listen, not just to numbers, but to people." He turned to me. "Emily, would you come here?" Every head in the room turned. My stomach twisted, but Watson's encouraging nod made me move forward. My knees felt weak as I walked to the front. "This is Emily," Watson said. "She doesn't have a finance degree or a corporate title, but she reminded me what leadership really means." I looked at the crowd, faces that had spent their lives chasing figures, now staring at a diner waitress. My palms were sweating, but something inside me pushed forward. I don't know much about your business," I began softly, "but I know people. And I've watched enough of them struggle to know that everyone here wants the same thing, to feel like they matter." The words just poured out. "A company isn't built on profits. It's built on trust. If you can make the janitor feel as important as the CEO, you've already won." A few people nodded quietly. Even the CFO, a stern man with silver hair, folded his hands thoughtfully. I continued, "Sometimes, success doesn't mean expanding your empire. It means remembering why you built it in the first place." When I finished, the room stayed silent for several long seconds, and then, slowly, applause began. It wasn't loud or forced. It was genuine. Watson looked at me, his eyes glistening slightly. For the first time, I saw something behind his confident smile. Gratitude. After the meeting, as the executives filed out, one of them, the same woman who had mocked Watson earlier, approached me quietly. "Miss Emily," she said, If you ever want a job in strategy, you'd be a fool not to ask. I smiled politely, unsure what to say. When everyone left, Watson turned to me. You just did in 10 minutes what I couldn't do in 10 years. I laughed softly. I only said what everyone already knew. He walked toward the window, staring at the sun cutting through the fog. Do you know why I built this company, Emily? I shook my head. My father was a mechanic. He died working double shifts so I could go to college. I swore I'd never live poor again. But somewhere along the way, I started living empty instead. I swallowed hard, feeling a sting in my chest. Maybe that's why you came to the diner, I said quietly. You were hungry, not for food, but for something real. He smiled faintly. Maybe I was. For a moment, we just stood there, watching the city come alive beneath us, cars moving like tiny veins, sunlight crawling over glass towers. Then he turned to me and said, Emily, I'm done running this company alone. I want you by my side, not as an assistant, not as a waitress, but as someone who reminds me what we're fighting for. I blinked, speechless. You mean, work here? He nodded. Work with me. Tears welled in my eyes. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at the diner, all the tips that never covered rent, all the dreams that seemed too far to reach. And now, the man who once mocked my advice was offering me a place in his world. Watson, I whispered. You don't need me. He smiled. That's where you're wrong. I need people who see what money can't buy. That night, I walked home under the streetlights, the wind brushing through my hair. I stopped outside the diner and looked at its glowing sign, Mel's Diner. The same walls that had witnessed my exhaustion had also witnessed my beginning. For the first time, I didn't feel stuck, I felt chosen. And somewhere high above the city, a billionaire who once believed he had everything had finally learned what wealth truly meant. Months passed, but the memory of that day, the boardroom, the applause, the trembling in my voice, stayed with me like a vivid dream I never wanted to wake from. Watson kept his promise. He brought me into the company, not as a decoration, not as a token, but as a partner in purpose. My nameplate didn't read assistant. It read Director of Community Innovation. He said, You'll remind us who we're doing this for. At first, people doubted me. I was the diner girl, the waitress who somehow found herself sitting beside the billionaire. But Watson never let them forget why I was there. Listen to her, he'd say in meetings. She has the heart this company forgot it had. Slowly, things began to change. The break room, once cold and quiet, filled with laughter again. Employees started sharing ideas not for bonuses, but for betterment. Watson began visiting factories, talking to workers, eating in the same cafeteria as his staff. He said it kept him grounded. Closer to the truth, he called it. And every Friday, we introduced something called Open Table. It was my idea, inspired by the diner. Anyone from any department could sit at a table with Watson, share problems, or pitch ideas. There were no titles, no fear, just coffee, notebooks, and dreams. The first few weeks, only a handful showed up. But then, word spread. The billionaire actually listens. By month 3, we had to move the open table to the main auditorium. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Watson stood beside me on the rooftop garden we'd built together. The city lights below looked like constellations. You know, he said, his voice calm, for years, I thought success was being untouchable. But I've never felt more alive than now, standing here, surrounded by people who believe again. I smiled. Because this time, you're not building an empire. You're building a family. He turned toward me, eyes soft. And you made me see that. For a long moment, we just stood there in the quiet. The air was cool, and for once he looked peaceful, like a man who'd finally made peace with his own reflection. Then He reached into his pocket and handed me a small folded note. I unfolded it. It was the napkin from that very first day in the diner. The one where he'd written, "Imagine what I could buy with her advice." But now, underneath it, he'd added new words in his neat handwriting. Turns out, I didn't need to buy it. I just needed to believe it. Tears blurred my vision. "You kept this," I whispered. "Of course," he said. "It's the most valuable investment I ever made." I laughed through my tears. "You know, I used to think billionaires lived in another world." He looked at me, smiling faintly. "Maybe they do. But sometimes it takes a waitress to bring them back to earth." Years later, our company wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. We funded small-town businesses, launched free mentorship programs for underprivileged youth, and opened a chain of community cafes across the country, the dream I once spoke about. Each cafe carried a small plaque near the door. It read, "Inspired by a waitress who taught a billionaire the real meaning of wealth." People came from everywhere to see those words, but to me it wasn't about fame. It was about that first moment, a tired man joking about money and a waitress too honest to play along. That one conversation changed both our lives. Sometimes I still visit the old diner. The booths are the same, the smell of coffee unchanged. When new waitresses ask me how I started, I tell them this: never underestimate the power of what you know. Your truth might be the wisdom someone else has been waiting a lifetime to hear. And whenever someone laughs at you for dreaming too big, remember, even billionaires can be humbled by a simple voice that dares to speak the truth. Because true wealth isn't in numbers or stocks. It's in moments that remind us we're still human. And that's a kind of fortune no money can ever buy.